Okay, welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. So I said before that I was going to try and squeeze, but then I started reading the texts and figuring out which ones I could skip, and they're just so rich. I don't know if we can skip text, but we'll try. So we started last week by talking about the nature of the soul, because we can't really understand what happens after we die until we understand what it means to be alive. So we're going to continue that today. But I hope what you'll see is we're going to slowly transition into imagining what happens after we die. So I think we're going to start with page 2. And again, if you're watching online, you can grab these texts at templebethdavidfl.org/die, which I know is depressing, but I wanted to give an easy URL. So I think we're going to skip the piece from the Zohar at the top of the page. The Zohar, by the way, is the primary mystical text of the Jewish people. I think we're going to skip that, and we're going to jump down to Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan. And he's going to talk about what happens to the soul that we talked about last time, and specifically what happens to the soul in relationship to the body. Now, it's very important to remember that just because he says it doesn't make it true. There are many truths to what we believe about what happens after we die. So he's going to be one perspective, and we'll hear many other perspectives, okay? So I'll read this first text. So we're at the bottom of page 2. The soul has its first attachment to the body from the moment of conception. So that's interesting, right?
Yeah.
Was it in this class we were talking about? Yeah, right? So there we go. So there's a different perspective, perhaps, that it's not about breath, but it's about the moment of conception, and remains with it. The soul remains with the body until the moment of death. Death is thus often referred to in Hebrew as the departure of the soul, Yitziat HaNeshama. You may have heard of Yitziat Mitzrayim, the exodus from Egypt. So Yitziat HaNeshama is the exodus of the soul. We are taught that immediately after death, the soul is in a state of great confusion. It is therefore customary to stay near a dying person so that he not die alone. We all know that, right? But what's interesting is the not timing, the tense. Is it the tense? Yeah, tense is past, present, future, right? Is the tense of this. After death, we should stay near a dying person so that he not die alone. So what that seems to suggest to me, at least, is that death is not a moment in time. It's a process. And that just because a person stops breathing or their heart stops, and what we would call them as dead, he says that we should stay with a dying person, right? That's a process, so that he not die alone. The disembodied soul is intensely aware of the physical surroundings of its body. This is especially true before the body is buried. We talked a little bit about that last week. The soul then literally mourns for its body for 7 days. This is alluded to in the verse, his soul mourns for him, from the book of Job. Then for the first 12 months after death, the soul hovers over the body. For the first 12 months after death, it gets a little uncomfortable here, I apologize. Until the body decomposes, the soul has no permanent resting place and thus experiences acute disorientation. It therefore hovers over the body during this time. Hovers over the body. During this time, the soul is aware of and identifies with the decomposition of the body. The Talmud thus teaches, worms are as painful to the dead as needles in the flesh of the living. I can't tell you how many times I've spoken to families who have talked about how their loved ones want to be cremated because they're so uncomfortable with the idea of worms and decomposition. And this text seems to suggest to us that it's painful not because the body is feeling pain, but because the soul is so acutely aware of what the body is going through. There's a good piece to this, though. Hold on.
So is this suggesting that even though the body's been buried, people come to the grave to visit, etc., so supposedly the soul is still...
The soul is hovering over the body, as it were. Most commentaries write that this refers to the psychological anguish of the soul in seeing its earthly habitation in a state of decay. The Kabbalists, the mystics, call this chibut hakever, punishment of the grave. We are taught that what happens to the body in the grave can be even more painful than Gehenna. Gehenna is the Hebrew word for hell. This experience is not nearly as difficult for the righteous, however, since they never consider their worldly body overly important. That's the key to me, right? For me, that's the most important part of this little teaching, is that the way we live in this life directly impacts the way we experience death. So the soul being overly concerned about the body really only refers to those people who in life were overly concerned with the physical and the material. If in our lives, our souls are focused on the spiritual, on the emotional, on the psychological, on understanding that we are more than just physical beings, then that translates to how our souls experience death and any pain that one might imagine the body is going through as it decomposes. And so the soul's experience of death is directly impacted by the way we live our lives.
So if people want to be cremated, what scenario does that present for the soul? First of all, I had always been taught as a young one that Jews didn't get cremated.
So Jews do get cremated,
Yeah.
but we don't believe that we should get cremated, right? Jewish teaching is that you should not get cremated. And the reason is, very simply, is that our body is not ours to destroy. Our body is lent to us by God, and it's not ours to destroy. It's similar to why we're not allowed to get tattoos, right? Because it's not our body to destroy. The way I always explain this to people is that when I went to Brandeis my freshman year, my RA, my resident advisor, told me that at the end of the year, I should get a tube of white toothpaste. And that before I leave my dorm room, I should fill in all the little holes on the wall from the posters that I had hung up with thumbtacks. Because if I don't fill it in with the toothpaste, I'm going to get charged for having to repaint the room, right? It's the same with our bodies, right? Our bodies, we are renting them. We're just borrowing them. And they're not ours to destroy. And so cremation is the ultimate destruction of the body. And our responsibility is to allow the body to simply decompose, which is not seen as destructive. It's seen as the natural course. It's seen as what's supposed to happen. So do people get cremated? Absolutely. And if you ask Mr. Shipper, he'll tell you that more and more people are getting cremated. It's growing.
I know that.
I'll be honest with you, I don't understand cremation. I don't understand the appeal of it. I would never consider cremation.
Well, it saves people money.
The money is a big thing, very big thing.
Right.
And don't you think you need the land to eventually grow crops for those who are living, rather than if you buried everybody, you probably wouldn't have enough room.
We have plenty of room. There. I mean, take down a few golf courses, and you'll have plenty of. I mean, it's a matter of priorities. I don't think that burying people is an issue of food availability or equality. That we've lots of other ways that we could distribute food more equitably.
So what happens to the soul if you do cremate somebody? It has
That's
to
what
suffer
my
the
point
pain.
was. Yeah.
A fire must be just as painful as worms,
So
just for
that-
a shorter time.
That's what was my question.
Look, I don't know
Yeah.
because I don't know because at least at this time in these texts, cremation wasn't really a thing, as I understand it. My guess would be is that the pain would be much more worse, because not only is the soul watching the body suffer, but it's watching the body commit a sin, as it were. Right? I mean, it's an excellent question. I don't have a good answer for that.
You're saying commit a sin is very harsh for.
It is. It's. You're not supposed to be cremated. It's a sin.
Yeah, today, maybe you don't, but people who have been relatively observant Jews who saw cremated.
I'm not sure I'd go that far. If you're relatively observant, it's not something you would consider. I just don't think so. I mean, if you're a liberal Jew who likes to come to shul every once in a while, that's not relatively observant, I think. Mm-hmm. If you're a halachic Jew, if you're a Jew who really follows and believes in the idea of Jewish law, then you just don't choose to do this. It's like eating pork. It's not even a consideration. You wouldn't even think about it if you're a traditional Jew. So then a very tiny quote from Reb Nachman. Shortly before his death, Reb Nachman of Breslov said, "I very much want to divest myself of this garment that is my body." So for Reb Nachman, he sees the body not even as perhaps an equal partner with the soul, but he sees the body as simply a cloak. It's a garment. It's something that our soul wears in order to be able to exist in this realm, when in fact he's looking forward to the opportunity for his soul to be set free and to realize its full potential, which is perhaps restrained by this garment that it has to wear in life.
Maybe it was very painful too. But that body gets very painful, especially
Yeah.
right before death.
And we say often that of people who've been suffering a long time that, now they're out of pain, and, pain. Now what I was just going to say is that pain doesn't exist for the soul, but actually in the text that we just read, we see that it does. But the pain that the soul experiences is an understanding of what's happening to the body. So I think that perhaps without the body at all, there is no pain. Maybe. It also probably depends on where you end up after you leave your body. Okay, so this is the text that I was thinking we should skip. Let's do that. Let's actually skip this text and let's go to the next page 4. We can always come back to it. Okay, this is again Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan. So this is a very specific question. What happens when a person dies, right?
When did this rabbi?
He's
live?
contemporary.
He's now.
Yeah, he's now. And he's an amazing teacher. I don't know if he's still alive, but he's contemporary. Would you be willing to read this text for us?
Sure. What happens then when a person dies? We know that the body ceases to function. The brain becomes inert and the physical person is dead. But what happens to the real you, the human personality? What happens to all this information, the memories, thought patterns, and personality traits? When a book is burned, its contents are no longer available. When a computer is smashed, the information within it is also destroyed. Does the same thing happen when a person dies? Is the mind and personality irretrievably lost? We know that God is omniscient.
Omniscient means knows everything.
Yeah.
I'm saying it for you.
One of those SAT words. He knows all and does not forget. God knows every thought and memory that exists within our brains. There is no bit of information that escapes his knowledge. What then happens when a person dies? God does not forget, and therefore all of this information continues to exist, at least in God's memory.
What do you think about that?
That God holds all of our life, all of our being, all of our souls, all of our existence.
That we continue to live in God.
Through God.
Or through God.
In God.
Yeah.
It's an overwhelming thought.
What do you mean? Tell me.
It's again the question of God and what God is and how God exists, and to absorb all that is difficult.
Yes, you're right. He's approaching this with already a certain amount of built-in faith that we may or may not have. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because I think last week we talked about God being inside of us in the neshama, and here now we become part of God.
Right.
I imagine it must be so painful for God with all those memories I have to keep straight.
Wow, what a beautiful, we think about, that's very, very beautiful. We think about how painful the loss of a loved one is for us. Imagine how painful it is for God. Remember, we're all God's children also. So every time one of us dies, God loses a child. And for God to have to carry all those memories. Now, of course, it's only hard for God when we imagine God because our imagination is so limited by our humanity. Of course, if you strip away all the limitations that we can conceive of, then God it's no problem, right? It's no big deal at all for God.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, very beautiful. So this suggestion is not comforting to me. The idea that we live in God's memory. It's not that it's not comforting, it's not enough, right? It's not enough. I want more than that. I want to know that there actually is a real existence beyond this life. And when I mean real, I don't mean a bodied existence, but I don't want to become part of a mush of memory. I want and I want my loved ones to be distinct in some way. And so as we go a little farther, we'll see if that's even possible.
It's humanity's desire to control what they are part of, I think. And
You mean my desire for that uniqueness?
Yeah, it's not just you. I've been thinking since childhood about what I believe or what I don't believe, and I accept it, but it's like hard to accept that it's something I'll never really know.
Well, you will eventually.
Well,
we all will eventually, right?
That's right. Nobody gets out of this life alive.
That's right. That's right. Okay, so let's look at a story now. This is a narrative piece about an example of how perhaps a soul was aware of what was going on in life. So this is from the Talmud in the tractate Brachot, and it's about Reb Chia was his name. Would someone like to read it?
I'll read it. Reb Chia's sons went out to the villages where they had their family estate, and they stayed so long that they forgot their learning. They took pains to try and recall what they had learned. One of the sons said to the other, "Does our father, who is no longer alive, know this pain that we are experiencing?" The other one replied, "How could he know, being dead? For after all, it is written in scriptures, his sons may attain honor, and he, a dead person, will not know it." Job 14. Whereupon the other replied, "But does he not know? But it is written in the very next verse, but his flesh will pain him, and his spirit will mourn for him." And Rav Yitzchak said in explanation of this verse, "The worm is as painful to the dead as the needle is to living flesh." Obviously, then, the dead are aware of the mortification of their bodies. Presumably, they are likewise aware of other affairs of this world.
Beautiful, thank you. So if a soul knows about its body's suffering or its body's decomposition, then doesn't it make sense that that soul would also be able to know about other things happening in the world? Would know about the successes of its family members, the trials, the tribulations? Isn't it possible that a soul could actually be fully aware of what's happening in this world? Right? Why would we say that it's limited only to the suffering of its own body? Right? That's the suggestion here. The Talmud is quick to say, no, that's not right. You want to keep going?
Okay. The Gemara rejects the proof from this verse. They said they know of their own suffering, but they are not necessarily aware of the pain of others.
So let me just ask you quickly before we go on, does that make you feel better or worse? Do you imagine or hope or dream that your loved ones would know of your successes and your struggles in life after they've died? Or do you want them to not have to worry about that?
Well, on the one hand, if they knew, I guess you wouldn't want them to worry.
Right.
But on the other hand, it would feel nice to know that there's a connection that they still feel and that they know of the successes.
Yeah.
And so there's a conflict there.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Because they really have no can't do anything.
Well, that's a question. We'll get to some
Oh,
text
okay.
later. We'll get to some text later that sort of address that question.
It's a personal thing when you think about it that way. And I'm sure everybody probably feels differently.
Yep. Should we keep going?
The Gemara,
Continues.
okay. The Gemara continues to debate this issue. But do they then not know of the affairs of the world? But consider the following episode, for it was taught in a Baraisa as follows.
This is an amazing story, by the way.
It happened that there was a certain pious man who gave
A dinar. It's just
that's a money,
yeah, it's a
as charity to a poor man on the eve of Rosh Hashanah in a year of famine, and his wife provoked him over it. So he went and spent that night in a cemetery.
Apparently, he was not just kicked onto the couch; he was kicked onto the cemetery.
Boy, was he meek. He just followed his wife's orders.
Yep. Get out of the house.
And while he heard two spirits,
And while he was there, sorry.
I'm sorry. And while there, he heard two spirits of two deceased children conversing with each other. Said one to the other, "My friend, let us roam the world and hear from behind the curtain that partitions off the divine presence." Rashi's comment, I guess. What misfortune it is to come to the world this year. Her friend replied, "I cannot come with you because I am buried in a matting of reeds."
So she was buried under a matting of reeds.
"But you go and come back and relate to me whatever you hear." So she went and roamed and returned, and her friend said to her, "My friend, what have you heard from behind the curtain?" She replied, "I heard that the crops of anyone who plants this winter at the time of the first rain will be destroyed by hail." Hearing this, the pious man went and planted at the time of the second rain. Everyone's crops were destroyed, while his were not destroyed.
So maybe they can influence what happens in the world. Let's just finish the story with the next paragraph.
The next year, he again went and spent the night in the cemetery, and he heard the same two spirits conversing with each other. Said one to the other, "Let us roam the world and hear from behind the curtain what misfortune is to come to the world this year." Excuse me. She replied, "My friend, I did not already tell you that I cannot come with you because I am buried in a matting of reeds? But you go and come back and relate to me whatever you hear." So she went and roamed and returned, and her friend said to her, "My friend, what have you heard from behind the curtain?" She replied, "I heard that the crops of anyone who plants this winter at the time of the second rain will be blasted by a dry wind." Hearing this, he went and planted at the time of the first rain. Everyone's crops were blasted, and his were not blasted. Whereupon his wife said to him, "Why is it that last year everyone's crops were destroyed by the hail, and yours were not destroyed, and now everyone's crops were blasted, and yours were not blasted?" So he told her the whole story. They say that it is not more than a few days later that a quarrel broke out between the pious man's wife and the mother of the child whose spirit he had overheard in the cemetery. And in the course of that quarrel, the wife said to her, "Come, I will show you your daughters buried ignominiously in a matting of reeds." Now the next year he again went and spent the night in the cemetery, and he heard the same two spirits conversing with each other. Said one to the other, "My friend, let us roam the world and hear from behind the curtain what misfortune is to come to the world this year." She replied, "My friend, leave me be. The words that we spoke between ourselves in years past have already been heard among the living."
Okay. So, did we understand the story? Does the story make sense? So there are two dead children, and they apparently are schmoozing with one another. And they say, hey, let's go see what's going on in the world. One of them can't leave. She's under a matting of reeds. So the other one leaves. It's unclear whether how a matting of reeds would prevent a soul from journeying out. That makes it, the image that conjures it for me is that the body is stuck under a matting of reeds. But let's leave that for a moment. The soul goes out, it gets information, it comes back, the guy hears the information, he's able to hear these two souls conversing. So there's one piece of the puzzle, right? Can we hear people who've died speak to us? According to this, yes. Can people who've died understand what's happening in our world? Yes, according to this. But then the third question is, can people who've died hear us in response, in reply? And the answer seems to be yes, according to this, because the guy's wife who kicked him out in the first place, and the mother of the child who is under the matting of reeds get into some sort of argument. And she says, just the most awful thing in the world, let's go to the cemetery together so I can show you that your kid is stuck under a matting of reeds and can't, and then the next time that the two souls speak, the one under the matting of reeds says, you know what, they can hear us. So the souls didn't seem to think that this was possible, but she said they can hear us, and maybe that's a bad thing, and so we should stop doing this.
This may be way out, but I heard once that the reason you put rocks on top of the gravestone was to prevent the soul from wandering.
It's very possible. I've never heard that.
I never heard that.
It's very possible. Traditionally, historically, the reason you put stones on the grave is that in antiquity, graves would be covered up by stones to prevent animals and robbers from coming along. Nowadays, it's sort of morphed into, we talk about God as Sur Yisrael, right? Sur Yisrael, Kuma Bezer, right? Sur is a rock. So God is the rock of Israel, something that's everlasting, it's always there, it's unmovable, it's unshakable. And so we place a stone as a symbol of God's endurance, as a symbol of our loved one's endurance, as a memory with us, as a symbol of our endurance, as a memory with our loved ones. So symbolic of eternity, I think. But that's very possible. I just haven't heard it.
Do other religions
Place stones? I don't know.
I didn't hear the question.
Do other religions place stones?
Oh, I don't know either, but I
I'm
always,
not sure.
in my family, it was always this remembrance thing, and when the next person comes, they'll see that other
They'll
people
see it also. Yes.
will know that
Beautiful.
you loved. And
Yes, that someone else was there and came to visit. Beautiful. Yeah. So according to this story, so far, souls can interact in our world. They can see what's going on. They can speak to one another. We can hear them if we listen, I guess, and they can hear us, or they can perceive us. I'm not sure whether it's here, but they can perceive. It seems like it's here.
I had this discussion once with somebody who we were talking about something similar, and it's sort of the conclusion I think we made was that, well, we want somebody, maybe it was a parent, an uncle, an aunt, or a good friend, to know that this happened. And so we kind of imagine that they can, if they're deceased, that they can have heard us and know what we're doing. That was.
Or maybe we're not imagining it. Maybe they really do. Look, I know lots of people, myself included, who speak to people who've passed. And you can call it imagination, or if you believe that the souls can really hear, then maybe it's not imagination. And do I believe that, I'm sorry?
It's a comfort.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I absolutely believe that people that I love who've gone on have spoken to me. They don't walk up to me and say, hey, David, how you doing? It has always been in code. It's always something strange happens and you have that sense that they were sending you a message. It's that kind of speaking to me. But it's like, in the movie Ghost, right? When the ghost couldn't speak right away, and so it had to knock things off the table to get that kind of thing. So let's read the last two sentences, which are great. So the first one is just concluding this proof.
The Gemara concludes the proof. Apparently, the dead do know what is spoken by the living, since the spirit was aware of what her mother had been told.
Done. Beautiful. The story makes sense. We believe, we agree. Wonderful. Until the next sentence.
The Gemara rejects the proof. Perhaps another person died in the interim and went and told them about it.
So the question that Gemara is struggling with is, how did the dead child know that the living people had understood, had heard of what was going on? So the first proof says, because they can communicate, they can all hear. The second one says, no, they can't. That's ridiculous. Someone in the interim died and then told, and then tattled on the woman or something like that. So even though with the rejection of the proof, we still learn from this that souls, after we die, have the ability to communicate with, at least with one another. That there is some existence in which souls are able to communicate with one another, and perhaps even roam the world, even with this proof rejected. That perhaps souls are allowed to be to exist in our world in ways that we can't understand. Okay, and one final little quote here until we really jump into the afterlife, from the book of Job. And when after my skin is destroyed, then without my flesh shall I see God. Right? We all know about going up to the pearly gates, right, and being judged by God or seeing God for the first time. But we really can only fully do that when we don't have the trappings of our physical bodies. Okay, so we are absolutely not going to get too far into this. I'm just going to close the door, but we're going to give it a start. Okay. So we're going to start with sort of an overview from Rabbi Or Rose, who's another amazing teacher of mysticism and of philosophy and theology. And so this is, yes. So first from Rabbi Or Rose, and then a quick little teaching from the book of Isaiah. Would you be willing to read for us?
Excuse me, is that a male or a female?
Or is a male.
Okay.
The subject of death is treated inconsistently in the Bible, though most often it suggests that physical death is the end of life.
I'm sorry. In this case, it's a male. It is not always a male.
Okay.
Sorry.
Or it's a rose. This is the case with such central figures as Abraham, Moses, and Miriam. There are, however, several biblical references to a place called Sheol in Numbers. It is described as a region dark and deep, the pit, and the land of forgetfulness, where human beings descend after death. The suggestion is that in the netherworld of Sheol, the deceased, although cut off from God and humankind, live on in some shadowy state of existence. While this vision of Sheol is rather bleak, setting precedents for later Jewish and Christian ideas of an underground hell, there is generally no concept of judgment or reward and punishment attached to it. In fact, the more pessimistic books of the Bible, such as Ecclesiastes and Job, insist that all of the dead go down to Sheol, whether good or evil, rich or poor, slave or free man. Okay,
so that's the first example, or the first suggestion, is that there seems to be there's at some point a shift in the Bible, at least. Most of this stuff, by the way, does not come from the Bible. Most of it comes from rabbinic literature of our beliefs of life after death. And there's a specific reason for that, which we'll talk about a little later. But in the Bible, people like Abraham and Moses, they all just die. They're just dead. We talk about them being buried with their fathers. There's no afterlife that's discussed. Moses doesn't fly up in a carriage to heaven, in a chariot to heaven. They're just dead, and that's the end of it. And we forget about that. We think of them as such mystical figures that we think that maybe they live on forever. But even with King David, when we say David Melech Israel, right, David, King of Israel, will live forever, we don't mean literally. he's going to die. And at least biblically, there's really nothing after that.
But do we believe, or the rabbis that write about this, that their souls have gone on?
For the biblical mind, there's no discussion of that. There really isn't. Death is the end. Until we have this idea of Sheol in the book of Numbers, which is this sort of, it's not even purgatory. It's just a place where souls gather.
How much later is this in time where this occurs?
This is all biblical. Right now, it's all
It's
biblical.
still biblical.
All biblical. Now, just to really highlight how little we know at this point, is this amazing verse from Isaiah. Never has the ear heard it, no eye has seen it, other than God, that which he will do for those who hope in him. What he's saying is, I have no idea what happens after we die. And it's so important to approach the study with that little taste of humility from Isaiah, that these are all suggestions, these are all theories. We've never been there, we don't know. All we can do is try and glean from our sacred texts and from the stories that we have about what might be. Okay, so now why is there this shift from they just die and there's no discussion of soul or afterlife? Why did we have this shift? So it really all happens around, if you've been in any of my classes, the one Jewish date that every Jew should know is 70 CE, which is the destruction of the Second Temple. That is such a pivotal moment in Jewish history. It really changed Judaism completely. And so Rabbi Or Rose will explain to us now why that moment in Jewish history is also pivotal for our belief about what happens after we die. I'll read this one. The development of the concept of life after death is related to the development of eschatology, speculation about the end of days in Judaism, beginning in the period following the destruction of the first temple in Jerusalem, 586 BCE. Several of the classical Israelite prophets, Amos, Hosea, and Isaiah, began forecasting a better future for their people, which, by the way, shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. When there are terrible things happening in the world, what do all of the presidential hopefuls say? Our best days are ahead. America will be stronger. I mean, the idea that the prophets came up with life after death after the destruction of the temple should not surprise anyone. However, with repeated military defeats and episodes of exile and dislocation culminating in the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE, Jewish thinkers began to lose hope in any immediate change, instead investing greater expectations in a messianic future and in life after death. This was coupled with the introduction into Judaism of Hellenistic notions of the division of the material, perishable body and the spiritual, eternal soul. So why did they not talk about soul in the Bible? Because it was a Hellenistic idea. It was a Greek idea that we borrowed. Yeah, we learned in many ways about the eternity of the soul from the Greeks, and we incorporated that into our own experience. So the story of Hanukkah is coming out, right? The story of Hanukkah historically was around 167 BCE. So right in between the first temple being destroyed and the second temple being destroyed. Almost right in between, actually, like 100 years off. 167 BCE. And then these ideas, these eschatological ideas of life after death and heaven and all that really grew about 200 years later. So we owe them a thanks for inspiring us to think about the eternity of the soul and life after death. And the other piece of it is not just the influence from the Hellenizers, but after the destruction of the Second Temple, the Jews were looking around and they couldn't make sense of this destruction and how they had their lives had been torn away from them. And it was really in response to that the rabbis came along and said, oh no, don't worry. This life isn't the only life. In fact, what you suffer in this life isn't even nearly as important as what you will gain in the next life. The whole idea that there's a life after this life, that our souls live on, that we can have reward, that those who sin in this life will be punished in the next life, and those who are righteous in this life but suffer also and will be rewarded in the next life, that was really a direct response to people looking around saying, I don't get it. What is going on? Everything's wrong. I'm a good person. All the questions that we ask. I'm a good person, but I'm suffering. Where is God? The rabbis came along and said, no, you don't understand. The righteous will reap their rewards, but not in this life, in the world to come. Yeah.
Did that come out of Christianity? Because isn't that what they believe?
Look, Christianity was growing at the same time. So did we borrow from Christianity? Absolutely. I would argue that it was more the other way around, that they more probably borrowed from us. But clearly it grew out of, in part, what we learned from the Greeks.
Also, didn't we stop being such a cultic religion at that time? Once the temple's destroyed, there was no place to do the sacrifices and
Yes.
doing all that stuff. And now we could be a little more cerebral now that we...
Yes. So that was a process that actually started earlier. It started really after the destruction of the first temple, but you're right. In full force, it became a reality of the destruction of the second temple. Okay, we have to stop. I'm going to go sing, but in 2 weeks, we'll get into the world to come. We'll get into hell and heaven and reincarnation and resurrection and all that good stuff. So I hope that you'll be able to come back and that I'll see you on the 22nd. Is that what it is?
Yeah, I think it's the
22nd.
Good luck.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.